So if you're not already sitting with your partner from last time that you did the wallet exercise, try and do that very quickly. If your partner's not here, you can't find them, join a group to kind of participate in this. So, still without a microphone. Actually, tried to solve this problem, and it's not just me. There's something wrong with the microphone. So, I'm going to have to shout. I would appreciate if you could try and keep it down, because it's really, I'm not sure I have the voice to be able to shout over a lot of noise. So I can speak a lot faster, get done sooner, if I can actually talk and not have to shout over you. So I would appreciate that. Today we're going to talk about mindsets. I referred to it a little bit last week. We're also going to go through some of the initial phases of the EPICS design process. And really the important part is how you can apply this to your project. So the goal of these lectures are to introduce you to some concepts, help point you to resources that you could use depending where you are in the design process. Okay, and so we're going to focus on the early parts. For this week in your lab as part of the regular course, you should be completing your individual evaluation rubric. This is how you're assessed within EPICS. So it's very much like a professional performance evaluation where you tell your boss or your advisors what you've done and accomplished and what you plan to do the next year or the rest of the semester. So that's what we have to do as professionals. It's something that you're going to practice doing as part of EPICS. So the major things to look at are what have you learned and what have you accomplished? And where can we find evidence of those things? There was a link in the email for the evaluation rubric. I recommend that you download a copy of that. It's a Word document and edit that throughout the semester. So initially, this week you'll maybe have a few things that you've accomplished or learned and more things planned for what you're going to do the rest of the semester. As you go through the semester, those things should move up into the accomplished side of things. Okay? Semester plan is a plan for your project. So this is a project level document that you should have identified at least some milestones, expectations for what you plan to accomplish, what tasks you need to do for your project for this semester. So they go hand in hand. We need to make sure that everybody has a responsibility that covers all of what's on the semester plan and that your semester plan is appropriate with that. And that includes roles for everyone. Just FYI, updates to websites are due next week. So I know there's a webmaster skill session. If you're the webmaster for your team, you should be getting that information from your teammates and updating the website by next week. So that's an upcoming milestone. Okay? Any questions on these? So just as a FYI too, the individual evaluation rubric, that's a formative kind of feedback that you'll get in lab as far as how you can improve it for really mid-semester. In most teams, you can check with your advisor, but in most teams, for the 4-week check, we just want you to get used to using it. But at week 8, that's really when we use it to do the mid-semester evaluation. So really it's a point of having a conversation. If you have any questions about how to fill it out, ask. This is not supposed to be a mystery. Just ask your advisor or your TA or your fellow teammates on how to do that. Okay. Everybody got your prototypes? Let's see your prototypes. Here. Show them up. Okay. We're going to do the back and forth. So for 3 minutes, I want you to hand your prototype to your partner and let them experience it, use it, and get feedback. Again, this is something where you're not supposed to defend your prototype. You're supposed to let it go and see what you can do. And I mean literally let it go. Because I've seen sometimes in lab when we have done this, people will show them their partner how to use the wallet. And that's kind of missing the point. So hand your prototype over to your partner. You have 3 minutes. You can use this worksheet to be able to find out what worked, what can be improved, any questions or new ideas you have. Okay, go ahead and go. Partner 1 for 3 minutes. So you'll do feedback for 3 minutes and then we'll switch. So you'll have 1 feedback session each. When you hand it over, so you're writing the feedback you're getting on your prototype.
There's a lot of effort that went into this. It just isn't showing.
How many minutes did you spend?
You said 7.
7, good. I didn't want you to spend more than 7. Oh, you shouldn't have said that.
It was wasting time after about 3. Opening your frame, like stapling it between like a t-shirt, and wasn't jabbing anybody. All the ends, and then like the outer shell was bad. The guy wanted to be able to access his phone and his coins and stuff easily, and like hook it onto his bag. It's supposed to be like a clamshell.
Okay.
It's on my bag.
All right, go ahead and switch.
So what's your one?
Okay. So we're done with this rapid prototyping experience lesson, probably an hour in going through one design cycle. So what did you learn from this that you think you can apply? What are some of those big ideas do you think that you learned from doing this? Anything that surprised you? Who thought a 7-minute prototype could be valuable before? How many found their 7-minute prototype to be valuable in getting feedback? Yep. What did you find out by the prototype? Yeah.
You got to consider the end user, not just your own preferences.
So what was something that the prototype allowed you to learn that you couldn't learn from just an idea?
I made a bifold. I made a trifold, and he wanted a bifold, so he didn't like it.
Okay. Okay. How about back there? What did you learn?
It let someone fiddle with what you made, so you can see little problems that might pop up that you didn't think of.
Right. Absolutely. Because too often people are directing, this is how you do it. But when we send our projects out, do we always have the instructions manuals? Or even if we do, who wants to read the instruction manual before you use something, right? You want to use it, hand it to someone, and many of the times they want to be able to use it. What were some other things you learned? Yes?
7 minutes isn't enough to make a decent prototype.
True, but did you learn something from 7 minutes? Prototype. Anything? Often, though, was it easy to give up your 7-minute prototype if they didn't like it? What happens is we often spend a lot of time developing a prototype on a design, and then we're devastated when they don't appreciate what we've come up with. So how can we quickly develop prototypes that elicit really good feedback that we can use, and so we don't get stuck in that design or attached to a design and aren't open to listening to our community partner related to that. So thinking about that. It's not very much, but often those are enough to get some feedback. Did it still get some feedback? Okay, so it served its purpose. Too often we want it to look too nice and not get the feedback we need on that. Anything else? Yes?
Your first idea usually isn't the best one.
Okay, your first idea usually isn't the best one. How did you get it to a better idea?
By actually listening to what your partner or client wants.
Okay, right. And what was some other aspect of that? Did you ask him once?
No.
Okay, iteration, going back, right? Digging deeper into what our partner wanted with this. All right. Anything else? I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the mindsets that really, I think, are exemplified by this experience. And these come from the D School, the design school at Stanford. So really, and I think this is hopefully embodied, are some things that you learned in doing this wallet exercise. And that really show, don't tell. Often that showing somebody something, what you're talking about, is more effective than trying to describe it. We can use words or we can describe something and people have one picture of it and you're thinking of something else. If you show them some kind of representation, that's a lot better way to do it. The focusing on the human values. This is really understanding and digging deeper into what your community partner, your user needs versus what you think they might need. And then clarity, being able to communicate that. It kind of goes along with the other ones, and we didn't focus on it as much in this exercise. But I can tell you, as you participate in design reviews, when you have your project partner meetings, being able to communicate clearly what your ideas are is an important part of designing, so that you're on the same page with that. And you can kind of inspire your team and everybody you're working with around the same idea. Embrace experimentation. So one of the ideas, and I think the thought that the first idea is not always the best idea, really experimenting and finding ways to get feedback on the ideas we have. Because we can do a lot of thinking in our brain about what we think, but what are ways you could actually get feedback from your users? So build a couple of different prototypes, hand them to them, see which ones they like, maybe parts of ones that they like. Really think about how can you set up small experiments that can elicit the data to make an informed decision on your design that's not just what you think it should be. Okay, so think about doing that. Be mindful of the process. There are times where you are kind of in a brainstorming phase, and divergent thinking is the right kind of thinking. You want to be thinking of new ideas. But there are times in the process where you need to kind of make a decision, and so bringing in those kinds of ways of thinking and those tools are appropriate. So if you're getting ready to deliver and everybody has agreed on all the specifications up to that point, that is not the time to do a whole bunch of brainstorming on something different you can do. Okay, it's getting the job done. So just kind of knowing where you are in the process and what's the right kind of tools to be using at that part. Bias towards action. So like Stanford calls this design thinking. IDEO, the internationally known design firm, talks about design thinking, but really it's a misnomer because the emphasis really is on doing and not just thinking. So anytime that you're thinking about a design idea, think about how you can demonstrate it and put it into action, because that'll be key. Radical collaboration. Most of those really successful design firms bring people from all different kinds of backgrounds. So in EPICS, we're really pretty unusual. We've had, in the last academic year, 70 different majors participate. And so you probably have people on your team from all over the university. Leverage that difference of perspectives in being able to be effective in your design. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the EPICS design process. And I think many of those same mindsets are embodied in what we talk about within EPICS. As far as this will be focusing a little bit more on the process that's used, but I think you'll see that the mindsets are underlying it. That we start with understanding our community partners, our users, and that we're biased towards action. There's prototyping and interaction all throughout this design process. EPICS as a course is really focused and appreciates and values different perspectives. So those are things that we hope are embodied in this process. We're going to talk quickly about some of the steps that are used in the beginning parts of this design process. One of the things to see are all these cycles of iteration. So we're going to talk about them as if they're totally distinct phases, but there's actually interaction that goes on. Doing the project identification, you may have a general idea of what your project might need to do, but when you go into specification, you actually will refine that. And so you may go back and actually realize in that specification phase that there's a different problem that you really need to address, that you name the problem not correctly, and that really there is an underlying or a different problem that needs to be addressed in design. So, all right. So the first phase is the project identification. And again, as you look at these, as we go through the different phases, there's a goal that's stated at the top. And so we're trying to achieve the goal. There are a number of activities that you can probably do, and probably will do most of them in achieving it, but it's not, like I said before, not like a recipe that you just check them off, and just because you've done them, you know that you're done with that phase. You need to go and see, have I met the goal? The other part is to look at this bottom part here of gate to see if, before you go to the next step, you've achieved that. Because there's actually been times, for example, that we do a problem identification and that we realize that it actually doesn't fit within EPICS. There's some aspect of it that's either way outside our expertise, our kind of within our mission, and so we might decide this isn't actually a good fit and we don't even go forward, okay? There are times when we get to specification where we realize there's a commercial product already available that's affordable, and our community partner can just buy that. And we don't need to design something new, that it's actually already exists. At that point, we decide, you know, that's the appropriate action, and we don't move forward. So we have these gates. Gates are things that are also used in industry. In industry, often the next amount of funding is associated with passing that gate. In EPICS, we're not as strict about that, but there is kind of at least a conceptual understanding or a theoretical that we are, you know, still, that you need to satisfy that gate to continue to go forward in your project. So for project identification, some of the main things that we do are a needs assessment. If that isn't already defined, many of you have project partners that came to you with a need. We need a communication device to help people with severe autism be able to communicate. That might be the need that they've stated. If not, then you might even need to go in. Maybe you finished a project and you go to your community partner and say, what's next? What can we do next? You know, what are your biggest needs? And kind of doing an assessment with that. For the needs assessment, this is not trying to do a full specification at this level. It's just getting a sense for what is the current situation and why, how do you want to improve it? So it's looking to identify what that gap is for your community partner. And so here's some questions that can guide you in being able to do that. And that one of the other things is that, why is this important to your project partner? Because that can actually help you get at to that basic need. There may be some other need that they're actually pointing to that they haven't articulated yet. And so doing this can help you identify that. So if your project is already in some later phase of the design process, this is still something you should be able to go back to and keep in your mind as you're moving forward in your design. Because you might, if you're not thinking about what your community partner really needs and what your goal you're trying to achieve, your design could go off unintentionally in the wrong direction. So keeping this in mind. So if you don't know what this is for your project, you should find it out. Okay. So quickly we can move to the specification phase. And this is actually something that's important to spend a lot of time in doing. Because if you don't get this right, you're not going to get your project right related to that. So the goal here is to understand what is needed by your community partner at a more detailed level. The project identification kind of gets at that high level, what does this need? Communication device. The specification development should at the end get to a point of knowing measurable, specific requirements for your project. It takes a while to get from that high level understanding of what is needed to kind of the technical specs that are required at the end. This is also not a place where you decide how you're going to do it. It's still what. Okay? So this isn't like deciding which microprocessor you're going to use and already figuring out all the parts you need before you even leave your community partner meeting. This is really still trying to get at that understanding. And then once you have the specs, then at the following phases, you'll explore how you're actually going to do this. So again, the focus is on what for this. There are a variety of different things that start to explore different aspects of your community partner, starting with context, but then getting down to, so these are really broad issues, to very specific customer specifications that have very measurable evaluation criteria for them. So what do we mean by context? Why is it important? Yes?
So if you get your context wrong, and you design something that in your goal is to design something that works in Africa, and you forget about your context, and you design something that only works in Alaska, you might have a bit of a problem.
A bit of a problem, absolutely. Yes. Anything else? Any other ideas? And so there's all different levels of context. So that's a cultural, maybe geographical context that's important. There may be a political or social context that you need to be aware of. It may even just being aware of the environment. What does that classroom really look like? You think you're going to design something this big. Does the teacher even have room for that in her classroom? She's got 30 kids in this small space. Is that even going to fit? Those are the kinds of things, big kinds of questions and needed. And absolutely, if you get this wrong, then your project's not going to work. So one aspect is understanding the social challenge that's being addressed by your partner. So it's important, and I think I've seen this in many, many reports, but if you don't already know what the mission is of your community partner, you should have that written down somewhere, because that is really important. You, again, need to know that you're meeting their mission with that. Really finding out what is within that mission, what is it that they're trying to achieve, and who are the people that they serve as well. So you're often working with a community organization that has people in the community that they're serving. So really understanding all of that dynamic is really important. Any other socioeconomic status, other issues that are important to understand about both your project partner and the clients that they serve. Another important thing is understanding your project partners and organizations, because all of these organizations are guided by boards or federal, maybe state laws. There may be organizational criteria that are important to understand. And so understanding those things are really important. For example, how your project partner is funded. That is something that could be very relevant to your project. Maybe it isn't, but those are aspects that could have an impact. Also, as far as kind of regulations. You know, schools are often worried about needing to meet, standards, either state or national standards. Understanding what is motivating your project partner is very important in being able to design well for them. So if you're working with a school and you can design something that helps the teachers meet some standard, it's going to be a lot better for them and benefit them a lot more than if you just come up with something that doesn't align with that. So understanding what's important to them will help you do a better job in designing something that both meets their needs and satisfies maybe some requirements that they've already articulated with that. One thing you can do is do a stakeholder analysis, and this is identifying who are all the important people that are involved in your project. And this was from a rural healthcare project that's going on, an initiative. And I actually thought it was really good that it showed a bunch of different organizations or stakeholders that are involved in their goal to try and improve access for patients in rural areas to medical care. And so if you go to this website, they actually then talk about all these different relationships between the different stakeholders and how they interact with each other. But this is a first thing to see. And your interactions with the stakeholders vary depending on who they are. A lot of times it has to do with interest and power in your project. And so you can actually go through for each of those stakeholders and look and see what is it they need, what do they need within this project or relationship, partnership that we have. How will this project impact them? Then you can actually, if there's something that could be negative, what would be the strategies that you can employ for that? And then actually identify whether their interest in the project is high or low, and where kind of the power dynamic is. And so you might have different strategies for different stakeholders in your project. Maybe your direct users don't have a lot of power, but they probably have a high interest in it. And the kind of interaction you're going to have with them is going to be different than maybe a principal or a superintendent in a school district who maybe controls the funding, so has more power, but isn't going to have to be involved in every small decision that you make on the design. So thinking about your different stakeholders and making sure that you're engaging them in your design process. So you can do a stakeholder analysis. Again, if any of these things that I'm talking about you haven't already, either you're not at that part in your project or you're past it, you should be aware of at least this information. So go back and find it. If it's not in the current design doc, pull it in for future teams, because this is something that's important in keeping in mind. Again, this is another way that you could look at the stakeholder analysis and really just if there's risk, could they make your project, basically veto your project, or what is the risk involved in that? And again, you want to look to see how you should engage them and nurture that relationship and build trust with all your stakeholders and gain buy-in with all your stakeholders so that you'll be successful. Because too often, those are the things that really derail the project. It's not the ability to get it done. It's not doing it in a way that's actually built rapport and buy-in from everybody. So part of these are some different methods that can be used. And you've done some of these already with some formal or informal interviews. You can do a lot of observations. I think that's a tool not used as often as could be. I can tell you, one of the Camp Riley team during the summer, we actually go and spend a week at the camp with the kids with disabilities. Just observing the kids in their day-to-day activities provided more insight than any interview we could have ever done. Watching them eat meals, navigate through the camp, those were all things that provided so much insight. So I think it's a really good use of your time to just spend time with your community partner, maybe the users, to really get a good sense for what they need. because that will provide a lot more insight than maybe the formal interviews. Because people aren't always kind of in touch with that tacit knowledge that they have about a task, but you can observe it and get insight about different things. As I said, watching the campers eat provided more insight about how we should arrange the controls for the sailboat than if we would have just asked them about doing that. You can develop user profiles or personas, and I know how many people have already done that in in one of their classes. Not so much. Okay, so this is a case, and I think it's sometimes finding that interesting balance within EPICS. We often have a community partner or maybe a very specific person that we're working with and meeting their needs. But there's often a larger set of users that we should be considering. So how do we represent the interest of this broader set of users? So one of the things that are used in design is developing personas. So a sample person that represents the characteristics of a typical user, or a couple of personas to do that. And then the scenarios. Tell me the story of how they use it and what's the outcome. So this would be of the desired state of your project. They're going to pick up the communication device. They're going to put the card on it to be able to communicate, and then their caretaker or their teacher is going to give them the thing that they were asking for. Really going through that can help you identify what are some needs of your project. Because then you'll say, oh, I need a way for it to be able to be programmed, or some of these other things. Role playing, you can put yourself kind of in your user's chair or vision. If you're working with actually kids, you might just kneel down and look, what does it look like from their height? We have a picture on our website. I don't know if it's shown up, I think, where the kids are kind of pointing up to the LEDs. Well, part of the problem is, the reason they're excited about seeing the LEDs is because the team built the display for the museum at adult height, not kid height. So the only thing the kids could really see were the little LEDs that were in the bottom of this. And so they were excited to see that, but that really wasn't the point of the display. All the team would have had to do was just get down to eye level for a typical kid to notice that this actually isn't going to be very fun for them. So you can do very simple things for that. You can do more things about simulating different kind of disabilities. One thing that we've done is actually taken a wheelchair and used it to get from Armstrong to here. And just going through that experience can at least kind of make evident some of the issues that come into play, and that actually campus isn't all that accessible. It's kind of hard to get to this room. And signs are at the right height. You can't see, the maps are too high. There are a lot of issues related to accessibility. You can actually tape buttons to your joints to be able to simulate arthritis, for maybe if you have a user that is elderly. So there are things you can do to see what it really is like to kind of use your project based on your user characteristics on that. And then prototyping again at every stage and getting feedback and really handing it over and letting them use that is related to that. For interviews and observations, there was a lecture last week on that. We also have resources on the website that you can go, so that if you're going to do a interview, that you can actually look at those questions to do that, really going for open-ended questions, having them describe the situation so that you can gain insight to that. I don't know if any of you in your wallet exercise, somebody walked you through their wallet, but that was probably pretty insightful, more than if you just would have said, well, what color do you want? What size? You can gain more insight to users in really being able to construct those interviews really open-ended. So for personas, I talked about this before, the fictional character, kind of members of the primary stakeholder. So want to be careful that we're not stereotyping, but that we can represent a little bit broader user than just one person's perspective on this, unless the goal of your project is actually to meet a very specific. For example, we have a team that's doing prosthetic devices for individual users, and what that person needs is very specific to them. But we have other teams that are working on communication devices that are more general. Those would be a case to really understand who that broader user is. So, to give you an example, so this is an ongoing project, and if the HERD team isn't already familiar, they should look back on this, but we actually did develop this. So this is a handheld device. One of the things we realized is that often when we're designing communication devices, that if we target it for one particular person, by the time we get done, that person has outgrown it. So we recognized a general need in the communication area for people with disabilities, augmentative and alternative communication, and really wanted to address that. So what the team did was be able to develop the personas and the scenarios that then they took to speech specialists in augmentative and alternative communication, special ed teachers, and speech pathologists, so that they could actually get feedback on the scenario before they even coded anything or designed anything. They just talked about what those needs were, and that actually was really effective in doing this. So this project is based on a device or communication system that's used a lot with kids with autism. So I don't know if many of you know, I have triplets who are now 22, but one of my children has severe autism. And when he was 2, the way that he learned to communicate, he couldn't say or didn't say any words, but he would hand us a card that had juice on it. And that's how he asked for juice. And so based on that system, we were looking to find a device that after they get past the hand the card to be able to communicate juice, how can we have a communication device that would actually then say that and be the next gap in that they could actually communicate, but that was still portable. Because a lot of these communication devices are really expensive, on the order of $6,000 to $10,000. So we were looking to find a need on the team to be able to address that. So we identified primary users and secondary users for the project. User profiles actually identified characteristics of all of these, both the instructor and the student. Talked about a little bit more about the teacher, Mrs. Brown, what motivates her, what she's doing in the classroom, how she sees herself, just a little bit more insight. Also did it for the student that we had, who was 10 years old. Other things that he likes besides just the specific need of communication. And then this was a scenario. And this scenario was key at understanding what the device needed to be able to do. Because a team initially had one way of thinking of how this would work. When they took this to the specialist and the teachers, they could refine it to get it to the point so that they clearly understood what needed to be happen with the device. And it influenced some of the technical specifications that came out as a result of that. I already talked about role playing. I guess one thing is that pretending to have a disability is very different than having a disability. So if you're working with people with disability, I really recommend that you talk to specific users to get their insight, because their perspective may be very different. And just pretending to be blind is not the same as actually having a visual impairment. So just kind of, it provides some insight, but it doesn't make you an expert in that disability. Again, prototypes. These can be at all different levels related to that. You can be the visual, a little bit of the functional. You can do part of your design, or you can do more of your design. You can have different areas of that. But prototype, prototype, prototype. That's actually really key. All right. Let me see where we are. Oh, just as an example, and then this is actually pretty old, but they reported about this. So IDEO, the kind of famous design firm, they were working with surgeons who designed devices to be able to do sinus surgeries. And so they were watching the doctors and seeing that they were kind of having to contort themselves to use the device, because actually in the past all of them had been linear and it didn't have like the handle like that. And so they went to them, and these are parts you brought, not even like a 35 millimeter film canister, but they actually, after spending thousands of dollars to engage this firm, gave them that physical prototype. That's what they showed the surgeons and said, would this work? And they kind of held it and said, yeah, this would work. And so then they actually invested a whole lot more in actually coming up with the actual design. But they actually presented a prototype like this to the surgeons. So you've used this feedback matrix. So it's a tool you can use. You used it for the wallet, but you can use it in your designs. So we're out of time. So hold on one second. Just let me. Okay. I want you to go ahead and look. We didn't get to specifications, but I want you to see if you can find your team's specifications. You don't have to worry about that second part because we didn't quite get there. What things do you need to do to find out your specifications? But at a very least, come next week with your project specifications. If you're new to your project, or if your project's in the initial phase, what are some things you're doing? And then if you've had any prior design experience, how does this compare? Because I know some of you have come in with other design experiences. So I want you to think about what we're talking about with mindsets and what you're learning about the EPICS design process, how that aligns. Okay. Attendance, fill in your name, Purdue ID, and true for number 1. And either turn them into Manaz or myself.